I'm glad to be here. Are you glad to be here? Man, I'm so glad. If you're a guest here, I'd love to welcome you to Collierville Bible Church. You've come on a great day. We're having a standalone message today on the topic that everybody's been wanting to hear about, the subject of gambling, right? Isn't that what we've all been wanting to know about? And no, this has nothing to do with March Madness coming up around the corner. There's nothing strategic about this message in March Madness to come. Actually what happened is been kind of following the trends in just our culture, and honestly, in all my years of ministry, I've never actually talked about gambling, and really, honestly, have not studied it enough to have that much of a strong formed opinion about it. I just always considered it dumb, because why would you want to risk losing money? Okay, so that was as far as my kind of thoughts. But I've noticed since 2018, when sports gambling became legal, state by state, if a state would decide, and the platforms have grown. This industry now is predicted to be a $200 billion industry. This year when all the records come in and stuff. So it's actually grown quite a bit. And talking to our people over the last couple months, it seems like we haven't really thought about it much. And it's not that I sense that we have issues within our congregation. I would say that this would be one of many things. The Word of God is sufficient in principle and precept. And so why don't we look at God's Word and see what it has for us to start thinking about this subject matter. And the reason why I'd want to challenge us to think about this subject matter is because the stats are going higher and higher, that the more this has grown, this is becoming more and more of an issue, especially with younger men and middle-aged men. It tends to target men in their 20s and 30s, tend to go after this a little bit more. And what they found is, statistically, once 2018 happened and this online gambling, especially sports betting, became more prominent, they could see state by state, as it would roll out, that those states within that year would experience dramatic increases in bankruptcy, in credit card revolving debt raising. And so they saw a direct correlation, especially among younger men and middle-aged men. And so it's a thought that I think we should take a look at it. Remember, we're just going to spend one Sunday. And honestly, some of the ways for me to actually articulate something is for me to study it and to have the pressure of teaching it to you. I also would like you to be gracious to Pastor Nick, because I have not given a lot of real estate in my whole ministry towards thinking about this subject matter. In fact, oddly enough, I think, man, there have been so many different issues I've counseled through the years that people have brought to me, and some of the weirdest situations, all right? Oddly enough, I've never had anybody come to me about this particular issue, although it does exist. Now, it does exist, especially the lower socioeconomically an area is, the more it battles with this. If you'll notice, most of the times where you do see gambling establishments, it's usually in a lower income area. And so there's different reasons that I probably haven't seen this as much. Also, it's one of those things that is a shameful kind of silent thing, and that most men don't want to even bring out. Now, can women be a part of it? Absolutely. But it seems that it captures the impulsive idea that a lot of men struggle with, but it's there. So I want to talk about it, and I want you to be generous to me, and also want to have more conversation. I'm still kind of working through some of my thoughts on this, all right? So here's the title of the message. It's a long title. It might sound weird, but there's a reason why I'm putting it this way. How should we think about commercial for-profit gambling, okay? Notice I'm titling the message, How Should We Think About Commercial for-profit Gambling? How should we think about it? I'm not going after the kind of, I guess you want to call it gambling. I'm not going after your March Madness, stuff that you do with your friends, and, the winner, everybody goes and buys him dinner. I'm not going after that. That's not what I'm really my aim at today. That might be for another subject matter. I'm really trying to look at there is something going on. It has accelerated. And are there principles in Scripture to help us address commercial for-profit gambling? I will tell you this. The mechanism of for-profit commercial gambling is totally different from, you and your friends getting together and doing fantasy football. It's two different mechanisms, right? I want to look at this mechanism and what kind of underlies it and why there is some caution and why in our discipleship, as you disciple people, as you disciple young women who have husbands who are going to struggle with this, how should you address these women? As you find it might be in your own relationship, as you as a young man or you even as a woman find this in your own life, how should you think about this? So we want to look at this enterprise of more of the organized commercial for-profit. I'm not going after just the fun that you have between you and your friends. I'm going after the idea of what? Casinos, sports betting platforms, state lotteries, online gambling, gaming platforms. They really exist. That's what I'm looking at. By the way, just if you might not have noticed, there's been a sanitizing of even those words. For instance, we really don't call it gambling anymore. We call it gaming or interactive play, fan engagement. Or even casinos no longer call themselves casinos. For the most part, they try to build themselves as entertainment destination, family resort and spa, the gaming floor, right? Sanitized words. The state lotteries now are sometimes often referred to as public benefit gaming. Or even sports betting is not called that. It's called sports investing, right? Instead of betting, it's buying in, taking action, play. Now, we all know this, that anytime you feel like you as an industry have to use different words to sanitize and take away from the stigma of something, there's got to be an issue. I'll give you the most raw example. We no longer call them strip clubs. We call them what? Gentlemen's clubs, right? Why? Because that sanitizes it. It makes it seem a lot more easy to acclimate to. Well, that's happened in the gambling industry as well. The for-profit commercialization has intentionally chosen these words, and there's a reason, because it does have a target to it. And its target is particularly young men. It is targeting men and some of the vulnerabilities, especially those who of our younger crowd that are now noticing in life that it's harder to get ahead. Life is more expensive. And you can work hard, and it seems like your money doesn't stretch that far. And so there's a gravitating appeal, especially to a younger generation of this may be a way out. Now, I've got 7 lies that commercial for-profit gambling tells us, and then I've got 9 questions we need to ask ourselves. So here's 7 lies I think we really need to think through. Lie number 1 is this is lie number 1 of commercial for-profit gambling. It's not gambling if I know I'm going to win. That's lie number 1. It's not gambling if I know I'm going to win. Be honest with yourself. You don't always win, okay? And someone always loses in that kind of enterprise, right? And the person who really only wins, it's the house. The house always gets their cut. If the house was not getting their cut, then Southland and Tunica would not still exist, and neither would whatever online platform. The house always gets the cut. The second lie that sometimes we give into, the second lie cut off on my notes, right? Decided to, I'm going to go to lie number 3 then. I think I can figure it out by looking at my notes. Oh, here's lie number 2 that cut off on my notes here. That lie number 1 is, it's not gambling if I know I'm going to win. Lie number 2 is, no one really is a loser, right? But the truth is, someone is going to lose. When commercial enterprise gambling happens, it's banking on this idea that a limited person or group of people might win something, but there's going to be a lot of money gathered from people who are going to lose. And the incentive in the mechanism is, can you get people to keep giving in and giving more and more and more? There's a deception that's involved in it. And it usually attacks people and goes after people that are in the most desperate of situations. Number 3, here's another lie. People say it's only a financial transaction. But is it? Is it only a financial transaction? The question would be, how often does that transaction happen, right? Also, I think we need to ask the other question of how attaches our soul to that actual financial transaction. Everything we do in life, every bit of money we spend is actually speaking something about who we worship. We will give an account for our resources. Number 4 is the lie that commercial enterprise gambling is just entertainment. And I would like to tell you, it's more than entertainment, although it can be entertaining, but it's designed to entrap, okay? That's what it's trying to do. It can be very entertaining, but the question we have to ask ourselves is at whose expense? Number 5, it is not that much of a problem. Does anybody remember the movie Gremlins? You remember Gremlins in the 80s? You remember that, right? Does that throw you back? Do you remember Gizmo? When you saw Gizmo, he was cute and cuddly and really furry. And, now if you've never seen Gremlins, I have not seen it in a while, so I cannot promote that you go see it. Because every time I start thinking how wholesome the 80s were, and I watch an 80s movie, I discover that maybe the 80s weren't as wholesome as we were thinking. But nonetheless, if you remember, you couldn't feed or water Gizmo after midnight. If you did, then Gizmo would pop out these cocoons full of gremlins. It would just destroy things. And Gizmo looked cute unless you fed Gizmo under the cover of night. That's kind of what gambling, commercial gambling is designed. It's made to look attractive. You go to a casino, there's lots of lights. It looks attractive. You go to the online gaming platform, it fills you with all sorts of hopeful expectations of chance. But it's really a gizmo with really a gremlin right behind it. Number 6 is it's the same as investing. Here's another lie that some people tell. It's the same as investing. And I like to say it's actually different from investing. Investing is you have a company or something that you believe in and you invest in it, and then that company produces goods and services that you believe in, and that there are dividends paid to the shareholders. In investment, it's not really it's not supposed to be where there are losers in it. It's I invest in this and there are gains that are realized as a result of sound and wise investing in this business or this enterprise. That's investing. Commercialized gambling is not designed that way. It's designed that someone is going to win. And in commercial gambling, one person's gain is someone else's loss. And the house always gets theirs. Number 7 is a lie that we tell ourselves about commercial enterprise gambling. It has nothing to do with my relationship to God or my neighbor. And I would like to say it, actually in my study, it has everything to do with our relationship to God and our neighbor. In fact, it has a lot to do with even our neighbor. So with that idea of 7 different questions, 7 different lies that we tell ourselves, I've got 9 questions that I want to explore about this concept. Now, once again, I'm doing this because I've not really articulated much for myself. I find that as God's people, we don't really have much of a thought on it. And what I'm trying to do is just maybe put down a couple of planks, right? That we can just take some steps forward, start to think a little bit more about this. This will probably generate some more questions that I think are good questions, right? When we even think of how we invest. For instance, people ask questions about, hey, what about day trading? And what about things of that nature? And I would say, in my study, here's what I seem to find out. That the way we would go about investing should be built on the concept of love God and love others. That's how all of life. And so we have to ask ourselves, in the way we're investing, are we intentionally trying to do something that would take away resources from our neighbor because of his ignorance? Or are we trying to actually invest in solid weights and measures? Are we trying to actually do wise, hard work investing for the future? And you have to just kind of look at that. Now, I want to ask 9 questions. And once again, let's keep having conversation. Don't think I've not developed my thoughts on this to the same level of as I have about, for instance, the philosophy of counseling, right? I've spent years developing and honing in what I think about that. This is not an area that I've spent a ton on, but I do think we need to start thinking about it. You've got sons and daughters. You've got people you're discipling. You've got grandchildren, and this is an issue. And you want to know a great question to ask over the dinner table is how has this message affected you and your thoughts? It actually, if it's a $200 billion industry and predicted for 2025, once all the figures come in, and by the way, the year before it was $175 billion industry, and I think when I looked the year before that, it was a $150 billion industry. Anything that's growing by $25 billion, it means somebody's using it, and it also means that the digital platform has been a way that it mainly is now going after and producing itself. No longer do you have to drive down to Tunica and get a free room, right? Because you decide to go and do a little bit of gambling. By the way, fun story, my first week or two here at Carville Bible Church in 2012, my parents came down and gave Cindy and I a week off and looked after the kids, and they told us, well, go get a hotel and go have some time to yourself, which that's great, right? Grandparents, that's the biggest blessing I think that, my parents gave to us was just the times, that they would let Cindy and I have time together. What a blessing those times were. And so I remember I was here, I was new, I didn't know anything. And so I looked around for the best deals I could find, okay? And I found this one place in Tunica, Mississippi, and you could get a room with a jacuzzi tub for like $40 a night, right? Now we're talking 2012. That's cheap. And so I booked it. I booked, I think, 3 or 4 days. And I was so proud that I found this obscure hotel an hour away in Tunica, Mississippi. Now, mind you, I had no idea what this was. And I can remember bragging to the church about going down I don't know if you remember about going down to Tunica, Mississippi that week and not even knowing what I was talking about, right? And I remember us driving down there and getting there and pulling up and thinking to myself, I was bragging to the church about where Cindy and I were going this week. And so, but it was okay because most of you were there. I saw you at the blackjack table, so it was okay. It wasn't a problem anyways, so I didn't know. But hey, the room was really nice. So let's ask some questions about, once again, I'm going for this for-profit, this kind of commercialized, because it's a different mechanism than you or your friends getting together and having a game night. Although I would tell you, and my first question is, the question we have to ask ourselves is, can gambling be done in faith? Romans chapter 14, verse 23. And by the way, I'm going to have several scriptures I flip to. These are all the ones that are on my notes. Guess what? I may not do all those scriptures on my notes. We'll just see how time goes, all right? But if you're looking for a reference, it should be up there. Romans chapter 14 and verse 23. One principle you have to ask yourself is, can you do it in faith? All right? Romans chapter 14, verse 23 says, whatever is not of faith is sin. Contextually, the idea is that if there's something that your conscience is not settled on, even though it might be right for another Christian, you should not do it yourself if you can't do it in faith. So I would say, people ask, well, what about the whole March Madness kind of stuff? I would say, well, first off, if you can't do it in faith, don't do it. If you think there's something wrong, just don't do it, right? It's the holding principle of Romans 14:23. But you may be one that can with the simple March Madness bracket with your friends, and that's between you and the Lord. But the first question you have to ask yourself, just in general, especially with commercial, is, can it be done in good faith? Is there something wrong with it? Is there something in it that would be wasteful? Is there something in it that would be predatory towards my brother? There's a question you've got to ask yourself. Can you do it in faith? Now, if you ask Nick and say, Nick, do you gamble? Do you do any online gambling? Do you do any lottery? No, I do not. I don't do that stuff because I could not do it in faith, right? Also, I would say this. I would be so afraid of winning. You might be thinking, that's ridiculous, Nick. Is it really? Can you imagine what that would look like for Pastor Nick to go and win the lottery? You might be thinking, that'd be the best thing I've ever heard, Nick. it'd probably be it'd just be a terrible thing to, here's our pastor and here's how he's been placing his hope in God. He's been playing the state lottery. So can you do it in faith? That's one question. Now, by the way, these get a little more extreme. So I'm starting off kind of soft. The first question is, can you do it in faith? Romans 14:23. It's called the holding principle. If you can't do it in faith, I wouldn't go forward and do it. If you're unsure, uncertain about something, if you think it might be sin for you, don't go forward in it, okay? But next, number 2 is a question we have to ask ourselves is, does this commercial enterprise of gambling promote greed and the love of money? Does it promote greed and the love of money? 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 6 says, 1 Timothy 6 and verse 6 says, but godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. The Bible commends contentment. Verse 7, for we have brought nothing into this world, we can take nothing out of it either. And if we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. How does gambling actually promote this idea of discontentment, not being content with what God has provided us? Verse 9. But those who want to be rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and hurtful desires, which plunge men to ruin and destruction. Verse 10, for the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. And some, by aspiring to it, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Does gambling promote greed and the love of money? It absolutely does. The encouragement to Timothy here in verse 11 is, but you, O man of God, flee these things. Flee the love of money. This kind of commercial gambling promotes the idea of the love of money. It has caused shipwreck to many people's faith. God would instead encourage us to pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, perseverance, and gentleness. I'll be willing to bet that if you look at anybody who has grown by leaps and bounds in their faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, you're probably not going to find a person that is spending their money on the enterprise of gambling. Aside from that, let's take the 10th commandment. The 10th commandment says, thou shalt not covet. Does not gambling promote the idea of coveting? Does it not promote the idea of gaining something that is your brother's or your neighbor's? Number 3, this is the third question. Does gambling discourage responsible stewardship? Proverbs 21:5. Does gambling discourage responsible stewardship? The proverb says, the thoughts of the diligent lead surely to profit, but everyone who is hasty comes surely to poverty. What the Proverbs 10:4 says, poor is he who works with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. So the Bible really does discourage this idea of easy profit, easy money. It promotes the idea of hard work, sound investment. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad to make a profit. It doesn't mean that that's bad to have good investments. It doesn't mean it's bad to do wise investing. But does gambling promote this idea of discourage responsible stewardship, instead go after really quick money? If you were to read the parable of the talents in Matthew chapter 25, you find that God is not against sound investing. You find even in that parable the idea that there is a reward for his faithful servants putting to the resources that God has given them. Although in that text it's really not about monetary resources, but it uses it as a figure of it. Does gambling discourage responsible stewardship? And by the way, once again, it preys on those who sometimes are most weak in this area. It causes them to put their hope in chance instead of God's sovereignty. Number 4, does gambling reject the principle of work as a pathway to wealth? I read you Proverbs 10:4. This is question number 4. Does gambling reject the principle of work as a pathway to wealth? Proverbs 10:4, poor is he who works with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Do this. Look at Exodus chapter 20. I just want you to put your eyes on some scriptures I won't turn to for time's sake. Some we will turn to. Some we may not get to up there. By the way, there's nothing wrong with smart work, and there's nothing wrong with hard work, and there's nothing wrong with sound investment that multiplies that hard work's money. When you go to Exodus chapter 20, Commandment number 4 says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. Verse 10, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of Yahweh to your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your sons or your daughters. Verse 11, for in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. Notice that God works 6 days and takes a rest, setting a pattern for what our days and lives and rhythms are to look like. We should work. God works 6 days. Why can't we? Kind of idea. Right, so I'm saying the idea of commercial gambling tries to strip away the idea of hard work as a pathway to wealth. Instead, it promotes this idea of chance as a pathway to wealth. Proverbs 13:11 says, wealth obtained from empty effort dwindles, but the one who gathers with his hands abounds. Let me read that again. Proverbs 13:11. Wealth obtained from empty effort dwindles, but the one who gathers with his hand abounds. God has designed us from the very beginning to be a people who work, for people to save, for people to be wise, and the commercial enterprise of gambling really is designed for us to not act wise. It's also designed for us not to sit more idle and speculate. Number 5 question we should ask ourselves is, does gambling reject the principle of wise investing? Does it reject the principle of wise investing? And I would say yes, it does, because it promotes chance and not the sound wisdom that God's creation works over. Go to Matthew chapter 25. Look at Matthew chapter 25. I've referenced it a couple of times. But even in that parable, you see the idea that there is a commendation for wise investing of what God has given in resource here. In Matthew 25 and 21, the master comes and he settles the accounts of his servants. We'll start in verse 19. It says, now after a long time, the master of the slaves who came settled accounts with them. Verse 20, and one who had received 5 talents came up and brought 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed me 5 talents over to me. See, I have gained 5 more talents. And his master said to him in verse 21, church, what does he say? Well done, good and faithful slave. You are faithful over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of our master. Now, this parable is talking more than just about money. It's talking about all of our life, how we invest what God has given us. But still, we find the principle that God smiles and likes taking what God has given us and investing it right. But the gambling industry, the commercial enterprise, is not designed for wise investing. In fact, it manipulates and tries to make it seem like it is investing. But investing is you actually are looking at something that is providing commerce, that is a product, something that you believe in, and something that you can be rewarded for your wise investment. But gambling does not promote that. It actually promotes the idea of chance. And this is number 6. Does gambling promote chance over God's sovereign order? Does it promote chance over God's sovereign order? God has an order of life, and it's not to live life by mere speculation. God has not designed the world to work that way. I want to read you one quote from a guy named Rushdoony, and here's what he says. The gambler denies implicitly that the universe is under law. He insists that all life is a gamble, and a falling brick can kill you, and a total meaningless event always surrounds you because chance, not God, is ultimate. Since chance, not God, rules the universe, causality does not prevail. It is therefore possible to get something for nothing, and the gambler, knowing what the odds are, nevertheless expects chance to overrule law and enrich him. Of course, this is the way the gambling industry works, is it tries to just get you to keep giving just a little bit more and a little bit more. If you lose money, try to do a little bit more. Maybe you can win back your money. It promotes this idea of chance and not trusting God's sovereign order of how it works. The way God works is we go to work, we work hard, and then we save and we wisely invest. And then we do that so not just so we can live the end of our life as comfortable as we want. We do it so that we can be generous people, right? That's the goal. The goal is not just to hoard. The goal is that we can be generous. Number 7, does gambling promote idolatry? Does it promote idolatry? Matthew 6:24 It says, no man can serve two masters. He will either hate the one and love the other. He will be devoted to one and despise the other. Cannot serve God and wealth. Gambling promotes idolatry, promotes a violation of the first commandment. It promotes this idea of idol worship. It makes itself God in our life. And you can know this because sometimes the way the gambling enterprise works is it's trying to draw you back with more incentives, more rewards. It's trying to give you a little bit of money to jump back in. It's trying to sanitize its wording so that you be more attracted to it. But it is an idol. And it does promote the idea of the love of money. If there was not the love of money, it wouldn't be such an appealing thing. Number 8, does gambling discourage generosity? Go to Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. Does it discourage generosity? Notice this is Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28, and you're going to see why I'm pulling this verse out here in a minute when I get to number 9. And look at this. I'm already at number 9 here, right? We got like 10 minutes left of the message here, and I'm already at number 9. Aren't you amazed how far we've gotten through that? Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28. He who steals must steal no longer, but rather must do what? Labor, work, right? How does a person actually reform? How do they biblically change? Part of that is they no longer steal, but they start to work. But that isn't enough. What also must he do? Performing that with his own hands, what is good, that he will have something to share with the one who is in need. How does a man really reform and change when he's been stealing? He must work, and then he must what? Share and give. So that brings me to this idea that gambling discourages generosity. Because gambling is actually not about generosity. It is about how can I bamboozle my brother and cooperate in a system that's going to take for my brother when he will be in his most vulnerable state. Now, the thought may be, hey, I don't think that's happening because I place $5 bets, and I bet every other guy in the planet is placing $5 bets, and it's just merely the cost of a Starbucks kind of cup of coffee, and this is how I choose to spend my money. But I would say the difference is there's a goods and service, and no one's negatively affected by the coffee that you get from Starbucks, rather than the flip side is there are loads of people that you'll never meet and never know that are being mechanized by a commercial industrial gambling system that you'll never know the destruction. Now, the thought that some of us may have is, well, wait a minute, that's on them. I can't be responsible for my brother. If my brother is going to be that kind of gullible, why am I held responsible for my brother's gullibility? Okay, I'm being responsible. I'm setting a set limit on as I do my next sports betting, or as I buy my next lottery ticket. I'm being responsible. Why am I being held liable for what my brother does? Well, here's the deal. See, this is why I'm saying this is different. I'm talking about commercial, not you and your friends, because in the commercial, it's designed where you don't really ever get to see what happens to the losers. You don't get to see the destruction, the bills not getting paid. You don't get to see any of the stronghold to it. You see nothing. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say that you had a neighbor, and your neighbor was addicted to something pretty bad. And they had spent all the resources of their life. There was nothing left. You knew there was no groceries in the home. And all your neighbor had was a 2025 Tundra, right? Toyota Tundra or Toyota Tacoma. I don't think y'all got excited about that one, right? Or pick the car of your choice. Let's say your neighbor had a nice car, and that's all they had left of their name, but all your neighbor wants needs enough to make a good bet, right? And your neighbor comes over to you and just says, hey, my $30,000 vehicle, you want to buy it for $5,000? You want to buy it? And you're like, oh, man, and that already his wife and him are having problems. You already know that there's not enough groceries in the house. You already know that he has this stronghold. But you know what? If he's going to be a fool, that's on him. Sure, I'll pay you $5,000 for your $30,000 vehicle. Now, knowing all that information, would you actually buy it from him? No, you'd be like, he's at a weak point. I'm not actually protecting my brother during that point. Exactly. This is the problem. So I'm not talking about your March Madness time with your friends. I'm talking about the commercial industry is mechanized, that there are these losers that people who are losing that you'll never meet. And there are things that are going on in their life, and it sanitizes it and cloaks it behind a curtain that you'll never actually see. So there may be this issue of it's not affecting me, but there's others that it's being affected, which leads me to my last question. Does gambling promote exploitation? Does it promote exploitation? Do this. Turn over to Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. And here's where I think I'm for me in my study of this and trying to think through the commercial enterprise of gambling from family entertainment centers, right? Or sports betting, or sports investing, right? Use the sanitized words, right? How are we to think about these kind of things? How should we disciple our young men? How should we disciple our children? What should we be warning our high school students about? What should we be talking to each other about? I think the last question I have is, does gambling promote exploitation? And when I say that, I'm actually thinking of commandment number 8. If you look in Exodus 20, verse 15, it says, you shall not what? Now, this is interesting. In the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, you have different case laws and civil laws that are built off of that commandment. By the way, other commandments from the 10 Commandments are built off of it, right? So just don't understand when you start to see different civil laws, they're built off of the platform and foundation of God's moral law. Well, here's a moral law, thou shalt not steal. What are some ways to apply this the scriptures give us? Let me give you one example of a way to apply this. Go to Exodus chapter 23. Exodus chapter 23. What's one way to apply thou shalt not steal? It says in Exodus 23 and verse 4, if you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey wandering away, you shall surely return it to him. You see that? If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying helpless under its load, you shall refrain from leaving it to him. You shall surely release it with him. Meaning, if even your enemy, if his donkey is wandering away, his own resources, what he needs, you were to return it to him. It would be thievery to think, well, foolish him. He should have taken better care of his animals. It's my animal now. Or even the fact of his own animal is falling under a load and is going to hurt itself, that you have a responsibility to help in that situation. Go over to Deuteronomy chapter 22. Deuteronomy chapter 22. Here's another one with your neighbor. That was one where someone that's your enemy. In Deuteronomy chapter 22. I'm sorry, did I say 24? Deuteronomy 22 and verse 1 says this, you shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep straying away and ignore them. You shall certainly bring them back to your brother. Meaning, his animals got away. Should we think to ourselves, hey, wait a minute. Silly on him. If he wants to sell me his $30,000 vehicle for $5,000, what a fool. I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of the situation. No, it says this, if your brother is not near you, if you do not know him, then you shall bring it home to your house, and it shall be with you until your brother searches for it. Then you shall give it back to him. Meaning, even in the idea of thou shalt not steal is the idea that I can't even steal, I can't even take if it even would help me. In fact, I've got a responsibility to my brother to look after his resources if something accidentally happens and it falls into my lap. You see the principle? Verse 3, thus shall you do with his donkey, verse 3. And you shall do likewise with his garments, and you shall do likewise with anything lost by your brother, which he has lost, and you have found. You are not allowed to ignore them. The bedrock of this idea of this law is based back in commandment number 8. Verse 4, you shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fall down in the way and ignore them. You shall certainly help him to raise them up. So there's this idea of you see your neighbor's resources in a vulnerable situation. Are you supposed to go, sucker, my resources now? No, you actually are to look after, to guard, to protect, to try to restore them right. This is what I would say. The question we have to ask ourselves is, does the commercial enterprise gambling, does it promote this idea that I exploit my brother, especially when these platforms are built on the idea of exploitation? They are not there to look after people's best interests. They are there for themselves in the house, and they are built off the idea of if we can get many losers, we can have just a little bit of winning where it teases everybody out and incentivize them to come back into the game. Go over to Galatians chapter 6. Galatians chapter 6. Okay, y'all still with me? Galatians chapter 6. Here's what it should look like. Brothers, even if anyone is caught in a transgression, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness, each of you looking to yourself, so that you too will not be tempted. Saying, if you see a brother stumbling in sin, help him, right? You could be in the same situation. Verse 2, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Here's my question. We see a brother overtaken in sin. We should bear it with him, right? Help him, right? Help him underneath the weight of that sin. But how does gambling actually do that? Because actually instead, that system, the mechanized system of it, it's meant for exploitation. It's not meant for you to bear a burden with your brother. It's meant that I can take from my brother, and it's his own ignorance, or it's his own stupidity, or it's his own lack of skill. Are you understanding the principle that we're trying to get to? That we got to start asking ourselves some questions about this. I close with Luke 10. I promise you, this is just one message. You're not going to hear it next week. But I do want to be talked to on this. I am trying to think through it. One biblical counselor by the name of Andy Farmer had said this. He said, let me illustrate how the principle of gambling works. Last summer, a partnership of investors in Illinois won the national Mega Millions jackpot valued at $1.3 billion. So where does the money come from? It's not coming from the government. It's not coming from Wall Street, Elon Musk. Gambling is pretty simple. There are three kinds of people needed for a successful gambling operation. You need an occasional winner. All gambling systems are set up to have just enough winners to give people the illusion that it's only a matter of time and investment before their return. Then there's the second group, the gamers, people who find thrills in the risk-reward mechanism of gambling. Gamers don't need the big payoff. They just need to win enough to get the rush. That is where the addiction tends to start. And think they are smarter than the professionals who set the odds. They are the evangelists of gambling. Notice that, the evangelists of gambling. The people gambling systems try to find creative ways to keep in the games. But then there's a third group, the losers. Gambling is built on having so many losers that big payoffs are no big deal. How is there such a big payoff? You ever wondered, how are there so many millions of dollars to give away at these weekly lotteries? There's so much money because there are so many what? Losers. Does that not tell us something? It's the losers who pay the winners and support the gambling establishment. We're not supposed to think about the losers. That kind of kills the buzz of gambling. Gambling hides this loser payoff system by branding it as investment, entertainment, family entertainment, or sports investment. So what should we do instead? We should be like what we see in Luke 10. This is how we should think about it. Go to Luke 10. As they were trying to catch Jesus, it says in Luke 10:25, And behold, a scholar of the law stood up and was putting Jesus to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit life? And he said, what is written in the law, how do you read it? And he answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. This is Luke 10. And he said to him, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. Verse 29, but wishing to justify himself, he said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Now notice how Jesus treats the neighbor. And this is where we should be as well. To the vulnerable neighbor. Jesus replied and said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among robbers. And they stripped him and beat him. And he went away, leaving him half dead. And a priest happened to be going down the road. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite also he came to the place, saw him, and passed by on the other side. By the way, these are two in the story religious people that should have been the first people to help a brother who is in this, who had just been exploited and put in this vulnerable situation. But a Samaritan, who the people Jesus was speaking to were Samaritans, were despised people. Jesus says, but a Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion. When he came to him, bandaged his wounds, poured oil and wine on them. He put him on his own animal, brought him into the inn, and took care of him. And the next day he took 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, take care of him, whatever more you spend, then I will return when I pay you. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be the neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands? And he said, the one who showed mercy to him. And Jesus said, go and do the same. So, who is the person that Jesus commends? Not the people that ignore the vulnerable, the one that says, hey, I want to look out for those who are in a vulnerable situation. Here's my proposal is we need to think about this institution, this commercialized for-profit enterprise. It is an exploitive system that even though we may not be enslaved by it, which I would say, take heed lest you fall, 1 Corinthians 10:12. You could too. It's built to incentivize. It also is built on the idea of exploitation. And it's built on the idea of secrecy where you never get to see the actual results of it. If you had your March Madness pool and you knew that there was someone in your office who had, damaged himself and had a gambling problem, you probably wouldn't invite him to the pool. Honestly, you probably wouldn't do the pool at all just so you don't, in some way tempt him, correct? Why is that? Because you know him. There's no silence. There's no secrecy. This is the problem with this kind of institution. It is surrounded by all this secrecy, and we actually don't see the exploitation that we are actually culpable taking part in. We don't take from brothers. We actually bless our brothers. And isn't that a reminder of what the gospel of Jesus Christ looks like? God didn't come down to get something from us. He came to give something to us. His Son, forgiveness of our sin, redemption in Him. We serve a God who's not about taking, but He's all about giving for our good and His glory. Amen? Let's stand and pray over it. Father, we're thankful for your word. We're thankful for a chance. I know this is maybe an impassioned subject for many of us, and it doesn't affect, more than likely, most of our really regulars. But we know somebody. We'll come across somebody. We've got a younger generation that is being preyed upon and exploited at the very issue of vulnerable times. May we speak into it. May we watch for it. May we ask for it. Give parents wisdom. Give grandparents wisdom. Give older men and older women wisdom. Let us come out of the darkness if we're overtaken by this. Let us not live in the shame. Let us confess and repent and receive forgiveness. Let us ask for help. God, would you do that? We ask this in Jesus' name. And God's people said, let's worship together.